he's just throwing CSIS under the bus repeatedly.
Well, yeah, he's got to save his own ass.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. As promised, tonight we finish part 2 of Trudeau's testimony before the Public Inquiry Commission on Foreign Interference.
Let's get to it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Prime Minister, I'm Mark Pauly, and as you heard, I represent Handong. I'm going to start with the same issue that Mr. DeLuca finished with, and that is the allegations that were made in the newspaper, in Global at least, relating to the two Michaels. And we, as you know, we heard yesterday from Mr. Clow, among others, and Mr. Clow told us about how after the leaks came out, there were discussions about what to do, how to respond, whether there could be any response. And in particular, he said there were a number of discussions about how to get the truth out that the story was wrong. And he explained that up until yesterday, he was not able to say that publicly. Are you able to, first of all, tell us, did you have conversations like that as well about whether there was anything the government could do, whether anything you could do?
Well, further, what we actually did was engage the special rapporteur who had the opportunity to go through the evidence and state quite categorically that the allegations were false. And we felt that having the special rapporteur able to engage on that and qualify those allegations as false was perhaps more reassuring to concerned Canadians than having officials of the same, or the elected officials of the same party as Mr. Dong categorizing that the same way.
So I think you missed the boat on that one, Trudeau. Canadians do not find it more believable that David Johnston said that, because David Johnston was in the middle of a conflict of interest. Nobody believed it. Nobody believed anything that actually came out of his report. And that's why he resigned. The entire House found that, well, except for the Liberal Party, found that David Johnston was a conflict of interest. So, the allegations, what his report said was the allegations against Han Dong are false. Which ones? Because the only thing that Global reported was that, well, never mind. Let me rephrase that. Not the only thing that Global News reported. What Global News reported is that there was an intelligence report that Han Dong had repeatedly spoken to the PRC consulate and spoke to them about the fact that if the PRC held on to the two Michaels for a longer period of time, it would benefit the Liberal Party and hurt the Conservatives. That's what they reported. So when David Johnston comes out and says, well, the allegations are false, well, what are you referring to? Because Han Dong confirmed that he had a relationship with the PRC officials within the embassy. Han Dong confirmed that he spoke to them on more than one occasion. He didn't deny that he spoke to them about potential political points being scored by the Liberals. So what exactly is false? And he didn't deny that he talked to them about the fact that, well, if you perhaps held on to them a bit longer, it would demonstrate, a less hardline view on China. So this is the problem with this whole thing. What exactly are you suing Global News for, Han Dong? And how can you purport to continue that lawsuit when in your own testimony that everybody on both sides of the aisle agrees was an absolute disaster last week? How are you going to do that?
Well, and I find it interesting that the lawyer is saying these claims are false, but Han Dong himself wasn't really rebutting anything in his testimony.
He didn't say any of the intelligence reports were false.
Right.
He didn't say that did not happen. He was just confused by the conversation.
And so does that, well, aside from ultimately making that decision, did you, like Mr. Clow, have discussions about whether there was anything that could be released before that, like immediately to respond?
There were many discussions following the leaks on this issue, but on a number of the issues that were leaking, as we highlighted and attempted to highlight a few times in the media. There were clear falsehoods and inaccuracies in the media reporting, but the challenge of protecting national security meant that we were very much limited in our ability to contradict the false allegations being made by the leaker.
We couldn't say our own lies. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, because all you would have to say is what was reported in the media is false. What was reported in the media in regards to having that specific conversation was false. The end. Like, I don't understand where the national security problem comes in, because we've seen intelligence reports come out of the public inquiry that has a summary to it. Why can't you do the same thing? Oh, wait, because that would be a problem. Now, here's the problem. Like, Han Dong's lawyer hasn't seen, any of this, so Han Dong's lawyer can't say with absolute certainty that it's false. And speaking of leaks, Trudeau, I don't know if anybody knows, but what's come to light in the last week or so is that allegedly one of the top liberals, and we're talking top liberals, close to the Prime Minister, told Han Dong back when all of this was going on, and even, I think it was even before he was a candidate, that he was being monitored by CSIS. That's a no-no.
It must have been somebody in the PMO who had access to those reports.
It's a crime to do that, punishable by up to 14 years in prison. People keep throwing the treason word around. That could be construed as treason.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it meets the precise definition, but I mean, it is giving away state secrets.
That's in the ballpark. So now the question is who leaked that? Why would they tell Han Dong that? As Trudeau says, well, we had all kinds of information about foreign interference. Like, what? What? So there's a lot going on here.
And that difficulty you're describing, although we've heard, as I say, Mr. Clow talk about finally being able to say something publicly yesterday, you're speaking about it today to some extent. But I take it that same tension continues, that there's only so much, as we can see, that you're able to say.
But given, as Mr. Clow pointed out yesterday, we are now in a position to express and to repeat that the way it was characterized in the media was wrong.
Wait a minute, that's a different story. When you say the allegations are false, and then you say the way it was characterized is wrong, those are two completely different things.
Yeah. That's like, okay, something not happening at all versus something happening and then you taking it out of context.
That's like saying, it was reported in the media that 3 robbers robbed a bank with machine guns, and you saying, well, that the media characterized that completely incorrectly, when the truth is 4 robbers robbed a bank with pistols.
Or even like, for example, man arrested for theft, and then you find out man was arrested because he stole a loaf of bread to feed his family. Like, that's the out of context.
So, anyway, interesting choice of words there, Trudeau.
So let me turn to buses, the ongoing discussion about buses. We heard about you being briefed by Mr. Broadhurst in September 2019, and you talked about him flagging concerns and describing this scenario of students being brought to Don Valley North nomination meeting. And you asked whether the intelligence agency understood this thing that busing people to nomination meetings is standard, or I think you said regular earlier. Is that right?
Yes.
And
It will be your last question.
thank you. And you, sorry, let me make sure. And you raised the issue of whether the intelligence agency understood this basic issue that someone like you who knows politics and nomination campaigns knows. And did you figure out an answer to that, whether the people at the agency who were reporting this had that context?
Oh, certainly. Listen, our intelligence agencies, even though they don't organize nomination meetings themselves as political parties do, regularly turn to experts and learn about the things that they don't know about when they need to. So I am very confident that our intelligence agencies now know a lot more about the unfolding of nominations, which is important because they need to be able to ensure that those nominations, like all electoral events, are decided by the residents, and indeed by ensuring that our democratic processes are free and fair and absent interference by foreign actors.
I love the fact that he's just throwing CSIS under the bus repeatedly.
Well, yeah, he's got to save his own ass.
Not a smart thing to do.
No, I would not want to upset CSIS. We'll just say that.
And, when it comes to the buses, what Trudeau keeps skipping over is the fact that included in that report that was passed along wasn't just there was buses. As Michael Chong's lawyer told us last night, it was buses with students,
High school students,
that were compelled to be there by the PRC under threat of withholding visas and or threats to their families back in China. There's all of that other context. Mr. Trudeau, would you consider that typical of a nomination election? I don't think so. That doesn't require CSIS to get quote-unquote educated on how the nomination process works. Like CSIS, it's not like CSIS has only been around for a couple of years. Do you think they're really going to be collecting intelligence on foreign interference and they're not going to have any idea on how the political system even works front to back? Like, seriously? You want Canadians to believe that?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Human Rights Coalition.
It's the lawyer for the Human Rights Coalition.
evening. My name is Sarah Teach, and as the Commissioner stated, I'm representing the Human Rights Coalition. I understand, Mr. Prime Minister, that you have a lot of confidence in your NSIA's ability to receive information from the national security agencies. But I want to ask about your level of confidence in the agency's abilities to receive information from those most vulnerable, namely members of targeted diaspora communities. So let me just start with this. Were you aware, Mr. Prime Minister, that the RCMP's National Security Information Network is only available in English and French?
I was not.
Were you aware that the CSE's online reporting tool, as well as CSIS's reporting tool, and the OCCE's complaints form on the website are also available in only English and French?
But I am also aware that all those agencies use in language individuals who are able to reach into and engage with communities. But I take your word for it that the online forms are only in English and French.
Gee, why would that be?
Well, it's because Canada's two official languages are English and French.
Bingo. Like, why would government forms need to be provided in any other language?
Well, they don't. Legally, they don't. It's a courtesy if it is, don't get me wrong, but, and I'm not saying that, you know, you can't provide them in other languages, but in Canada, the government, I should say, is only required to provide it in English and French. That's it. Those are our two languages.
Yeah, like, if I were to show up and be a resident of, let's say, Switzerland, I'm not going to expect everything to be provided to me in English.
I appreciate that. And we also heard on March 27th with the Diaspora panel, that was the first day of these hearings, that community members oftentimes don't feel empowered to reach out to the agencies. They feel that they won't be heard. They feel it's a waste of time for whatever reason. Given these limitations, how can you expect the agencies themselves to really know, and therefore how can you expect the NSAA to really know if coercion, harassment, or intimidation of diaspora community members is happening, including in the context of elections?
This is certainly a challenge, and it is something that we've been working on over the past years to try and improve and increase not just the diversity within our various agencies, but also the ability of those agencies to reach into people who are often most vulnerable to interference, particularly in diaspora communities, but also at the same time, often with good reason, most suspicious of authorities and enforcement agencies that have not always treated them fairly in the past.
Thank you. Given these limitations, does this plant even a seed of doubt in your mind in terms of the integrity of the 2019 and 2021 general elections?
I think those are two different things. The challenge of any democracy is ensuring that people who perhaps disagree with the outcome of a given election still have faith that that is indeed the will of the people, the will of citizens. And that's where having a panel in place, both in 2019 and 2021, that could say that they have determined or they concluded that the election was free and fair is a really important step. Now, nobody can say that about the 2015 election, for example, or elections before, because those panels didn't exist. At the same time, what we learned from the 2019 election was applied to the 2021 election and will continue to be applied and expanded and become more, perhaps more sensitive or alert to various vulnerabilities that are more difficult to go into, particularly when you talk about racialized or marginalized communities. So there is more to do, but I do have confidence in the ability of our intelligence agencies and our panel to have drawn the conclusion that the elections in 2019 and in 2021 were indeed free and fair.
He said a lot of weird stuff in that diatribe.
Yep. The thing that was most interesting to me is the fact that she's trying to ask, I'm not saying she's trying to cast doubt, but she's putting it to Trudeau that, well, if the diaspora communities are not confident in reaching out to the different agencies to report any of this stuff, and they're the ones that are most targeted when it comes to interfering in elections, then how can you say with any certainty that the elections were fair. Now, diaspora communities aren't necessarily prevalent in every single city in Canada, so that's one. But that's not the angle that Trudeau took. Trudeau took the angle of, oh, well, we're really confident in the information that we get from our intelligence sources. Well, time out.
You've just been bashing them the whole interview.
Yeah. For the last couple of hours, you've been telling us that you don't necessarily trust everything that comes out of there. So either you do or you don't. You're contradicting yourself there. That's a big problem.
Well, and the other thing I noticed is that he was asked about the 2019 and 2021 elections and the results of those, and he had said something to the effect of, some people might not like the outcome, but we're confident that's the democratically elected outcome. No, that's not the issue here. The issue is not at the federal level. Again, it's not that the people of Don Valley North elected a Liberal. It's that the people of Don Valley North, the candidate they were given was a CCP plant.
Right.
That's the issue.
That's the concern. Whether or not Han Dong knew it is irrelevant. Because you have the PRC actively interfering to try to get this guy elected. And you need to be asking the question, why is that? Why would that be?
I mean, based on historical data, the people of Don Valley North were going to vote Liberal no matter what. So it didn't matter if it was Han Don in that seat or somebody else. So,
right.
So that part's irrelevant. That nobody is debating the results at the federal level. It's the results at the nomination within the Liberal Party in the EDA.
And those quote unquote elections, those nominations, have far fewer security measures in place than the federal election, which is why countries like China would try to interfere in those, because there's a much greater chance of probability that A, they would succeed, and B, a much lower probability that they'd be detected. Now, they were still detected, but according to Trudeau, you know what, didn't meet the threshold. Who decided that?
Yeah, it's low risk, high reward for interfering in the nomination process within the Electoral District Association.
And CSIS has even said that as well, that Canada is basically a playground for other countries, and that other countries view Canada as a playground for that because of things like this. And then you have Trudeau saying, oh, well, we have a very high threshold, like some arbitrary line that you say, well, we need to have this much evidence. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. If you indeed do have a threshold that's that high, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Yet you had a really low threshold when you had Tamara Leach and Chris Barber arrested, didn't you? So you can't have it one way for one circumstance and the complete opposite way for another circumstance.
Well, there's a two-tier level of justice in this country, unfortunately, and it didn't show up until the Liberals got into power.
There you go.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Doody for the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. Or, yes. No, it's the Sikh Coalition, I'm sorry. You'll be next.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Trudeau, my name is Prabjot Singh. I'm appearing on behalf of the Sikh Coalition. So I don't have a whole lot of time, but I want to start by asking whether you would agree that your government missed key opportunities to hold India to account for its interference in Canada, and to be more specific, so we can narrow down a concise answer, that there were attempts made by the government to minimize the threat that India posed throughout this relevant period, and actually tried to hide the severity of the threat from Canadians. Would you agree with that assessment?
No.
So, for a guy who loves to talk, why are you telling him you don't have a lot of time?
Okay, I'm just confused here. Maybe I'm just naive, but I'm surprised that India would interfere considering that they're a Commonwealth country. That's shocking to me.
There is some evidence that India interfered, but they share the last 10% of the interference with Russia and a few other countries. So they have some interference, but it's very, very minor.
But still, like, that's weird because we're all countries under the Commonwealth. You know, it would be like two brothers trying to, I don't know, thwart each other.
I doubt India views us as a brother or a sister.
No.
Mr. Operator, if we can bring up COM 155. So, Mr. Trudeau, this is a copy of the 2019 annual report of the NSI COP, which you mentioned was a body created by your government in the hopes of creating some oversight and transparency on security and intelligence issues. Mr. Operator, if we can go to page 73 of the PDF. So, as you know, this report deals with concerns about foreign interference. Is that 73 of the PDF? Or, yeah, 55 of the actual document. And so this is a section that deals with foreign interference specifically. And if we can continue to scroll down until 79, please. You can go a little bit faster. And stop right there, if you can hold for a second. If you scroll up, please. So there is mention specifically of foreign interference by the People's Republic of China, and continue scrolling. There's mention of the Russian Federation, and if we can pause right there, and it specifically says other states engaged in foreign interference, and if you continue scrolling, that entire section has been redacted. And Mr. Operator, if we can go to page 108 of the PDF. And if you continue scrolling until 113, you see these are instances of Canada's response to foreign interference in relation to China. And then it goes into instances of a response to Russian interference. And if we scroll down, and this entire section again is redacted. So, Mr. Trudeau, I'm going to suggest that the redacted sections of this report outline details of Indian electoral interference and coercive activities against the Sikh community, as well as outlining governmental failures in combating this specific threat. And so
What?
Even Justice Hogue is making a face.
Okay, this is dumb. You can go after Trudeau all you want, but I don't know what this guy's doing.
Yeah, what is he on about?
He hasn't seen the redacted portion of this. He's just saying, "Oh, you're showing the stuff about Russia, you're showing the stuff about China, but I'm willing to bet that you've redacted all the India stuff and that you've what's also redacted is the government's failure in like that's a heck of a guess. Like, you know, we have made no guesses as to what the redactions in these have made because it would be a completely uneducated guess.
So I understand that you may not be able to address this in a public setting for national security reasons. And if that's the case, you can indicate that to the commissioner. So can you confirm that that is the substance that's been redacted in this report?
Obviously, in a public setting, I can't speak to redactions made for national security, but I will say that the principle that anyone who comes to Canada from anywhere in the world has all the rights of a Canadian to be free from extortion, coercion, interference from a country that they left behind. And how we have stood up for Canadians, including in the very serious case that I brought forward to Parliament of the killing of Nijar, demonstrates our government's commitment to defending the rights and freedoms of Canadians, for whom, which are the reasons for which so many people crossed oceans and continents to come live in this country and build this country. And the suggestion that we haven't and we won't do everything we can to defend Canadian rules and values and defend Canadians from foreign interference is simply misplaced.
And so I take your point there, and I have very limited time, but I do want to confirm that it was you that approved the redactions in this report. Is that correct? Based on suggestions from public servants that you received.
Redactions are made by professional public servants, and we sign off on them, but we do not modify them.
But you do have the authority, the ultimate approval, and you do have the possibility to push back against excessive redactions.
Redactions are made by professional public servants, not by the political wing.
That's what he asked. Not what he asked at all.
No, not what he asked. You can choose not to approve it. Sure, you're not going to be the one crossing it out, but you can tell them what to redact and what not to redact. They're the ones still making the redactions. You're the one that has to approve it or not.
And does the Prime Minister have the authority to push back on the suggestions that are made in cases where there may be excessive redactions?
That gets into the entire question of declassification of information. And in the American system, the President can, declassify in ways that are not replicated in our system here in Canada.
So just very simply, I have one last question I want to ask after this. Does the Prime Minister have the authority and the ability to push back against those suggestions when there's excessive redaction?
The Prime Minister has an ability to engage in discussions and ask for reasons. But like I said, as Prime Minister and as a government, our habit and our approach has always been to allow the professional public service to make determinations around what needs to be redacted in the name of national security and confidentiality.
Wow. Okay. So that whole answer, folks, you may have already picked up on it. That whole answer, the intent of that is to say, if there's too many redactions, not my fault.
Well, and the thing I found interesting is he said, after it's redacted, it would be declassification, blah, 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 blah. I don't know for sure because obviously I'm not part of CSIS, but I would put forth that I imagine while they're in that redaction process and these professional public servants are saying, okay, we need to redact this section because of XYZ, or this section because of ABC. The Prime Minister, because it's not finalized, can go, no, I think that's fine. We should put that public.
Well, correct. And that's reading between the lines. That's what Trudeau is saying, because here's the thing. In an approval process,
it's not finalized.
If the person that is approving it isn't an approval, then you don't need their approval. If he is approving it, he's signing off, then you have the ability to reject. Meaning, you have the ability to push back, as the lawyer was asking. So he's trying to, pussyfoot around that so that he can again avoid accountability if people get upset about the amount of redactions.
Madam Commissioner, I have one final question, if that's okay.
Very quick.
Sure. I think you would agree that the lack of meaningful steps to expose and stop foreign interference activities when they first arise, including deliberate actions to redact any failures that may have been included in the NSI COP report, could play a role in India's increasingly aggressive interference and repression activities over this period. So that would be a consequence of failing to act effectively and failing to bring the threat of Indian foreign interference to Canadians' attention earlier. Is that correct?
I think that's certainly a question one needs to ask of the previous Conservative government that was known for its very cozy relationship with the current Indian government, whereas our government has always stood up to defend the minorities in Canada and the rights of minorities to speak out, even if it irritates their home countries overseas.
Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Wow, he's still bitter about his trip to India where he got snubbed the whole time.
Yeah, he's really angry about it. he's not happy.
Wow. Wow.
He's probably bitter that his plane broke down over there too.
Is that just an excuse, though? I don't know. I mean, I imagine he would have wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. That he wouldn't want to try to like stay for any other reason. But I don't know.
His prime ministership has just been one big long embarrassment.
So, Mr. Dude, it's your turn.
Good evening, Prime Minister. It's John Duty. I'm counsel for the Ukrainian-Canadian Congress. We've heard that Russia's foreign interference activities in foreign elections was the catalyst for the plan to protect Canada's democracy, and that Russia was a foreign nation that the Canadian government was concerned could potentially interfere in Canadian elections, correct?
Yes.
Okay. We've also heard from the site task force and the panel of 5 that neither identified any foreign interference activity by Russia in either the 2019 or the 21 general election. It would seem possible that Russia was not interested in interfering with Canadian elections in those years, or equally possible that they did and the Canadian government failed to detect it. Would you agree that it's possible that Russia interfered in one or both the elections and the Canadian government simply failed to notice it?
I would highlight that, of course, it is always possible that the entire body of our national security intelligence agencies are very sophisticated cyber and security communications establishment detected absolutely nothing or got it wrong. But I would also suggest that undermining Canadians' confidence in their elections being free and fair is probably something that Russia would love to see in Canada. So I would be very wary about saying that, oh, you know, despite the fact you didn't find any evidence of it, it still might have happened. I think we have seen the extent to which Russia is engaged in misinformation, disinformation, and actions of sowing chaos and destabilizing democracies around the world, including attempts at cyber attacks and successful cyber attacks in Canada. But I think one of the big differences between Russia and a number of other hostile or challenging state actors is the significant lack of a critical mass of either Russian diaspora or Russian speakers in Canada, as you contrast with the situation in Ukraine or in Latvia or elsewhere where there is an easier threshold for them to interfere in democratic processes.
So in a way, I kind of agree with Trudeau there in that what he's saying is because you don't have like these massive communities of Russians that have immigrated over from Russia to Canada, if Russia wanted to interfere, it's going to be a lot more difficult for them to find people that will, you know, they could start meddling with. Whereas when you're talking about countries like India or countries like China, there are these, you know, big pockets of communities all over Canada that would potentially still have family back home, and they can influence, you know, either out of a sense of loyalty or out of a sense of fear, because of their ties back to their country of origin. So that does make sense. It also makes sense when he says, you know, sure, you can acknowledge that anything's possible, you know, and that, you know, nothing was detected, but that doesn't really get you anywhere. Like, that's like saying, well, Australia could have interfered with our elections and there's no evidence of that either, but it's possible.
Well, and again, I think that's a difference between possibility and probability. And this goes for many things that we talk about on this channel and in politics. Just because something could happen, it doesn't necessarily mean that it did happen or even that it's likely to happen. So that's something I think we all need to keep in mind when we're listening to testimony in committee.
And, it's been suggested, and I believe this suggestion, that Russia isn't interested in meddling with our elections. They are interested in undermining the confidence in our elections, in our government, and even in our justice system. So if that's the goal, you're not looking to meddle with the elections at all, and you would approach that completely differently. And it's been suggested that Russia's primary form of interference is where you see it on social media. You've heard the terms Russian bots and stuff like that, where they deliberately launch these information campaigns to get people thinking about different things. So they're actually trying to influence the psyche of the Canadian public versus reaching into government and, trying to steer an election one way or the other. So, from their perspective, it's a lot more destructive if you can, drive a wedge between the people and the government, or get people to believe, silly things like the earth is flat. So this is where CSIS has been seeing a lot of the Russian involvement in Canada, whereas China is a lot more direct.
You spoke about the need for Canadians to be confident that the government is doing what it can to keep Canadians safe. How confident are you in the site task force and the panel of five's conclusion that Russia did not interfere with either election?
We know Russia is responsible for significant amounts of propaganda, of misinformation, of disinformation, and certainly attempts at interference are no doubt ongoing from Russia. They are a hostile actor, hostile to Canada, hostile to our values, hostile to our support of Ukraine, and hostile to our democracy. But to reach a threshold at which there is a belief that Russia posed a threat to the integrity of our elections, to the outcome of our elections, is certainly not something that either the site or the panel determined.
And finally, would you expect members of the Canadian-Ukrainian community to have a high level of confidence in that conclusion as well?
Yes, I think the Canadian-Ukrainian community, like all Canadians, can have a high degree of confidence in the conclusions by all of our national security experts and top public servants that the elections in 2019 and 2021 are free and fair. At the same time, I think Ukrainian Canadians, like all Canadians, need to remain vigilant to Russian disinformation and to the amplification of pro-Russia narratives in contexts and coming from places that one wouldn't suspect pro-Russian narratives to be amplified. I'm very pleased to see that Ukraine just passed the updated Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement over the past days, and I am continue to be bewildered at the fact that the Conservative Party voted against that update because they fell prey to pro-Russian narratives that are undermining Canada's support for Ukraine amongst Conservative Canadians, which I know is a thing of deep distress for many Ukrainian Canadians, and rightly so.
Why is this guy campaigning while he's testifying?
Right, the Conservatives weren't even allowed in here because it was worried that they would, turn this into a partisan parade. But here you have Trudeau doing the exact same thing that he blames the Conservatives for.
It's either that he can't help it because he's just like seething with hatred because he knows he's going to lose his cushy job, or that maybe he knows something that we don't.
Or why not both?
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Meticulously for the RCDA, Russian-Canadian Democratic Alliance.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. Hello, Madam Commissioner.
I am representing the Russian-Canadian Alliance. We have heard that some disinformation campaigns could have affected some political parties in the 2021 elections. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. I want to remove politics about this, and I want to talk about disinformation. Mr. Trudeau, I want to indicate that the conclusion from our national security experts and the panel in charge of ensuring the integrity of our elections, well, they agreed that there was no impact in the results due to foreign interference, whether it's in the different counties or in the general elections at large. So yes, there were attempts to interfere, but our elections were, the integrity of our elections stood firm. Question. I want to ask if that kind of attempt affected just one party, or could it affect all parties, leaders of all parties, like the Liberal Party and the others? Answer. Well, the involvement of foreign interference can affect just one party, all parties, or a few parties. It can also affect the country of origin, the county, and the region as well. Question. Did you witness this as a leader of the Liberal parties during the 2021 and 2019 elections? Answer. In my capacity as a party leader, I was supposed to campaign, speak to as many Canadians as possible, and ensure that as many Liberal members are elected as possible. I was confident in the institutions that we had built, like the P5, to ensure that the integrity of the elections stood firm, and they concluded that in both elections, 2021 and 2019, these elections were free and fair. Question. Let's put aside the institution. I want to ask you this question as a party leader campaigning in 2019 and 2021. I want to know what you heard with your own eyes and heard with your own ears and saw with your own eyes. Did these attempts affect members of the Liberal parties during both campaigns? Answer. Well, disinformation campaigns were quite widespread, more in 2021 than in 2019. We saw conspiracy theories with respect to vaccination. We also witnessed conspiracy theories about the World Economic Forum, and even personal attacks against me and my family. So yes, there was misinformation and disinformation during those campaigns.
So as we said before, Russia takes a different approach when trying to interfere. They sow mistrust in the institutions with the general population. So they, send out a bunch of Russian bots, and what they do is they just dissipate, or rather distribute, not dissipate, turning into Trudeau, distribute these conspiracy theories that are just pulled out of thin air in targeted spots on the internet that Canadians frequent, and then they start to be picked up by people, and then it just grows organically, right? So this is where all of this happens, and this has been steadily increasing by Russia, not just in Canada, but in all of the Western countries. So it's a different approach than China takes.
Question. Well, it can't be easy, especially when it affects your family. But my question is, you understand how social media works, so you did your campaign in 2015 thanks to social media. I'm sure it was very helpful in that campaign. I want to know whether there were some disinformation campaigns that were more important, and do you think that they impacted voters during those two campaigns? Answer. Well, every political party was using social media to try and garner votes, So, of course, social media played an important role in those elections. Question, I was talking about disinformation campaigns, wondering if you know whether we can influence voters in that regard. Answer, I think we can see that disinformation and misinformation impacts several people. There are thousands of Canadians who believed that vaccination was more dangerous than COVID-19 itself. And that is an example of people who were affected, sometimes fatally, by disinformation. Mr. Tira, you have a last question? This is my last question. I want to know if you witnessed disinformation that could, if you had witnessed this, why didn't you raise this issue with government institutions, those who are mandated and authorized to act on these misinformation and disinformation campaigns, especially when it affects the integrity of elections? Answer, because those institutions, and I speak regularly about this with my national security advisors about the impact of misinformation and disinformation. We can see, let's remember the situation that happened with the convoys in Ottawa to understand that it's a real situation, but it's not up to me to tell the panels that you have to be wary of disinformation and misinformation. It's part of their job to ensure that the elections keep their integrity, and they did a good job in 2019 and 2021. And we understand that in 2025, it will be even more difficult, and they have to keep doing the excellent job.
One last question, if I may. If you, as the party leader, you're in an election campaign and you see serious interference, false information, would you report that? Is Elections Canada doing its work? I trust that they will do their work, but it is part of our responsibility, all of us, whether we're citizens, candidates, party leaders, or political parties. We all need to work with the site task force to report any misinformation or disinformation. And this is part of what we're going to do with the panel. We will raise issues with the panel, but the panel does not depend on us to do its work. But yes, absolutely, we can contribute, and we should. Thank you.
Okay, so that was the last section. It's kind of a strange angle that the Russian-Canadian Democratic Alliance was taking there. He seemed, or maybe it was just the fact that he was trying to really get an answer. Was Russia, involved in foreign interference? It's possible, but it was a very kind of wishy-washy type of line of questioning. So I don't know if he got the answers that he wanted, but it didn't really give Canadians any new information when it comes out of that, because again, 90% of the interference when it comes to foreign interference with our elections is from China. That's what the intelligence has seen, and it's because we have such a high diaspora population across Canada, right? So, and again, that's not to say that there was so much interference that it compromised the federal election, as Fox has said. And as I keep saying, our elections are quite secure. However, the nomination process leading up to those elections, that's where the majority of the problems are. And I think part of the frustration into this inquiry has been the scope, because most of the foreign interference that goes on in Canada has nothing to do with elections. It has to do with harassing people. It has to do with threatening people. It has to do with forcing people to do things. And as we've seen with politicians, it has to do with threatening politicians and their families in order for China to get what it wants.
It also sometimes has to do with money laundering, in that that people will buy properties, sit on them for years, that they appreciate. Then Canadians don't have homes, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. There was some new legislation that was brought in, I believe it was around 2016, 2017, that put a big tax on foreign investors in terms of purchasing properties in Canada. And it was partially to dissuade that you would have these people in other countries purchase buildings here, leave them vacant for literally years, and just allow them to appreciate in value and then sell them.
Well, and it was often purchased with money
Dirty money.
that was proceeds of a crime. Yeah.
So, but anyhow, that's that was what the last segment of Trudeau's hearing was. Got some good questions in there. He again contradicted himself even more. So I don't call that one a win for Trudeau. I don't think he did well, especially when he continues to degrade his own intelligence agencies.
It wasn't as awful as Han Dong, but it wasn't very good either.